Morning. Welcome to this webinar from Bamford Media. It's our first webinar of 2019, so I guess I should start by saying a very happy new year to everybody. I think we're still allowed to say that 10 days into the year, aren't we? I'm Martin Bamford. I'm your host for this webinar. I'm CEO and founder of Bamford Media. We're a creative agency working with financial planners. And in this webinar, we're going to be talking and really sharing tips for everything you need to know about how to produce, publish, and promote your financial planner audio podcast. And podcasting is a subject that I'm very keen to talk about. I've been producing podcasts since 2004. To date, I've produced more than 500 episodes, both for myself and for clients as well. And I guess let's dive right into this one. Why audio podcasting? What makes audio podcasting such an attractive proposition for financial planners? Something I believe every financial planner should want to explore and want to have their own audio podcast. Um, there's lots of good reasons. Let's start with that one. There is very little competition at the moment in the UK personal finance podcasting space. I think I can count on both hands, probably just on one hand actually, the number of financial planners in the UK who host their own podcast. There are very few indeed. The big one in terms of success and downloads is Meaningful Money from Pete Matthew. That's probably the best established out there and the best well known out there. Our own podcast, Informed Choice Radio, it's about a year behind Pete. So we're about, what are we now? Just over 4 years old. But we've got about 100 more episodes than Pete. There's other podcasts. So Chris Budd has got the Financial Wellbeing podcast. Nick Lincoln has Money Hat Tip. Andy Hart has Maven Money. And then Justin King recently has launched the Retirement Cafe podcast. And I'm aware of a few more out there that are coming very soon. But compared with the United States, for example, where there are hundreds of financial planner podcasts, there is a lot of room in the UK market for more to be recorded. Reason number two on there, your existing clients and your prospective clients are listening to podcasts. So on the basis they're listening to podcasts, they should be listening to your podcast. Nearly 6 million adults in the UK tune into at least one podcast a week. That's according to Ofcom. And the number of weekly podcast listeners has more than doubled in the last 5 years. Around 11% of UK adults now listen to a podcast, and that percentage and the number of podcasts people are listening to is growing really quickly. I think something that indicates the amount of growth in the podcast market that's worth being aware of is just a few weeks before Christmas, the BBC launched and did a really big push behind their BBC Sounds app. And the BBC are going after podcasting now in a big way because they see that people's listening habits are changing. We don't listen to live radio anymore like we used to, in the same way we don't watch television episodes live. We do on demand. And all podcasting is, of course, is on demand radio. So the BBC is really pushing behind it. People are becoming more aware of what podcasting is and why they should be listening to them. And I really think that makes now a really good opportunity to get on board. It's still growing. We're nowhere near peak podcast yet. There is still a huge amount of room in this market and a huge amount of opportunity. Um, the type of people listening to podcasts are the type of clients that you want to be working with. So they're typically affluent, loyal, and educated, which I think are three factors that make for a good financial planning client. So clients and prospects are listening to podcasts. One of the really great things about podcasts is they fit into otherwise wasted time, so dead space. They fit into people's busy schedules, and everyone is so busy these days. It's so hard to find the time to do what we want to do and to fit everything in. But podcasts, for me personally, I listen to podcasts when I'm walking the dogs in the morning, when I'm working out at the gym in the evenings, and if I'm driving my car between meetings and things. So these are times when it would be difficult, if not impossible, to read or to watch video. In fact, I think when I'm driving a car, it would be a bit frowned upon to be watching video or reading. So podcasting fills that gap. And it's a great opportunity to create a very intimate relationship with the listener too. I think the act of speaking directly to somebody through their headphones and building that sort of connection with them, I think it helps to build a really close, trusted relationship, which again is very important for us as financial planners. Another reason, it's a great excuse to connect with people, not just with your listeners, but also with guests. And one of the big reasons I produce my own podcast is it's an excuse. And it's an excuse to send a cold email or pick up the phone to an author, a celebrity, a professor, a YouTuber, anyone else, and ask them if they'd like to come onto my podcast, onto my show, and be a guest. and talk about what they do, probably talk about their new book or whatever they're promoting. More often than not, and this surprised me when I started doing it, they will say yes to that invitation. And as has gone on, I've become a bit more confident in approaching bigger guests, bigger names. It's worked really well. So in the past few months, I interviewed a chap called Ryan Serhant. Ryan is star of Million Dollar Listing, a big TV show in the United States. He's also one of my favorite YouTubers. He produces a weekly vlog about his life as a real estate sales agent in New York. And without that podcast as an excuse to get in touch with Ryan, I could have sent him some messages saying, love your content, etc. But I had something to ask him. I had a question to say, would you like to come on my podcast and talk about your new book, which he did. And it's fantastic. It's an excuse to connect. It's an excuse to build your network. Other guests I've managed to snag for our podcast in the last few years: Daniel Hannan, MEP. And I know he's not everybody's cup of tea, but he's the Brexiteer MEP that wants to put himself out of a job. That was a hugely popular episode, probably because it was quite controversial. James Rickards, who is a huge name in the United States when it comes to investing, and we spoke about the next global financial crisis again. Really big episode, that one. Nick Hewer, the grumpy guy from BBC Apprentice, the host of BBC Channel 4 Countdown, he came on the show. That's just to name a few of the sort of the bigger names I've had on the podcast, but it's a really, really good excuse. Once you interview these experts, they become part of your network. You can stay in touch with them. You can leverage that connection and use them to connect to other people. And it just helps you to build a much stronger network. Finally, every single podcast episode you create is an excuse to create spin-off content, which is what we call repurposing. So I'll talk a bit more about this later, but if you've produced a podcast episode, you should be turning that into written content, maybe into video content. You should be collating it. Something I'm doing this year is pulling it all into a book. So it's one of my big projects, 2019. Nearly 400 episodes of Informed Choice Radio, including 200 plus guest interviews. And I'm taking the best bits and I'm going to make a book out of it. So 5 reasons up on that slide. Reasons why I believe that financial planners should have their own audio podcasts. If you're taking part in this webinar today, hopefully you're already convinced. So I don't have to convince you too much that these are good reasons. But let's move on to the getting started bit, the technical side of stuff. And the technical side of podcasting, I think, is what often puts people off getting started. It used to be quite a faff to put a podcast together, to broadcast a podcast. So when I created the first IFA podcast in the UK back in 2004, podcasting itself was really just getting started. It was really in its infancy. And the technical side of podcasting back in 2004 was horrible. I had to learn how to write a certain type of code so I could publish each episode. It is much, much simpler today, and I don't want the technical side of podcasting to put anybody off becoming a podcaster, because it shouldn't do. Um, Even looking back to 2014, when we relaunched Informed Choice Radio and really got back into podcasting in a very serious way, I invested at the time an awful lot in the technical equipment I thought I needed to use to make the podcast. So the best possible microphones, mixers, all sorts of gadgets you can imagine. And I'm not going to say here how much I spent on that, just in case one of my fellow business owners is listening to this webinar. But let's just say at one point I built a shed in a downstairs office in our building, soundproofed it and made it into a recording studio. That sort of tells you how far I went, how far I thought I had to go in order to get the best possible sound quality, the best possible kit. The good news here is 2 things. Firstly, you can benefit from the mistakes I made. And secondly, the technical side of recording and editing and publishing a podcast today really has become a piece of cake. In the same way that it's now very easy to make a website or to do anything online, it's now very, very easy to do anything with tech. The tools are out there. It's very, very easy to do. And the cost of that equipment has come right down as well. If you really wanted to, you could do everything in terms of producing your podcast on your smartphone. You could grab your iPhone or your Samsung Galaxy, whatever you've got, and you could record straight into that. You can edit on that. You can add some music, and you can upload from there into a podcasting host via their app. I'm not going to recommend you do that. I think it's possible to do that. It may not be preferable to do that. You can get much better results if you make just a small investment in some really high quality kit. But I wanted to point out that iPhone podcast recording is a possibility. So don't let the technology be a barrier to getting started. So the podcasting kit that I recommend, and it's the same kit I use today. You can see part of it on my head as I speak right now. It's very simple to use. It's very very high quality, so it produces broadcast quality sound. And what I'm going to do is, after this webinar's finished, I'll post a blog on the Bamford Media website, so bamfordmedia.co.uk, with links to all of the kit recommendations I make in this webinar. So don't worry about making notes or trying to sort of look for it as we go. Um, but there really are two main elements to the podcasting setup I use, and that is an audio interface. It's the bit that connects the microphone to the computer, and a broadcast stereo headset, which you can see me wearing right now. That's it. It's that simple. So the interface I recommend to everyone is called the Focusrite Scarlett, and it sits between your microphone and your computer. It converts the sound into an electronic signal, basically through a USB cable. It's one of the best preamps I've ever owned, and I've owned quite a few. And again, not going to say how much I spent on those, but I own quite a few. I've tested lots of these. But it's got the best sound quality, really high quality preamps, and no hiss, no distortion. And they make a few different models, of which I've got several. The Focusrite Solo is the one you can get started with, and it's got one input for your microphone and one input for the headphone, and that's it. It's very very simple. You can currently get it for £82 on Amazon, and it plugs straight into your PC, your laptop, your Mac via a USB cable. The one I'm using right this second, right down here next to my computer, is the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, and this one has got two microphone inputs and a headphone output. And that's particularly handy if part of your podcast setup is going to be having two people sitting around a table or at your desk having a discussion. So you're doing your interviews face to face, or you're having some sort of roundtable discussion. I've also got, and it's not plugged in at the moment, it's under my PC here, the Scarlett 18i8, and that model has four microphone inputs, and it's got two headphone outputs. That one we use for roundtable discussions where we've got up to four guests, so that's a really powerful bit of kit there. I said also, as well as an audio interface, you're going to need a microphone, and I've experimented a lot with microphones. Microphones come in two different flavors: dynamic, which means you have to get really close to it and it cuts out lots of background noise, or condenser, which is sort of a studio grade recording studio type thing, and it captures the whole room sound. Don't use a condenser microphone. They're cheap as chips on Amazon, but unless you're in a treated room, a soundproofed treated room, you will hear everything, and you'll hear your breathing, you'll hear someone else breathing next door. They really do pick up everything. So use a dynamic microphone, which means you have to get close to the microphone so people can hear you. But it does help to cut out the background room noise. So you can even use these in quite noisy rooms. The one I recommend is the one I'm wearing now, and I've got four of these, and we use them all the time. It's called the Audio Technica BPHS1. It's a broadcast series, broadcast stereo headset. And the reason I got into using this one, two reasons actually. One is another podcaster called Lewis Howes uses them. And I saw them in his videos. I like the sound quality, so I found out how to get hold of one. And the other is it's used by sports commentators. So when you see commentators speaking at football matches, this is what they wear, and it does a great job of cutting out the background noise. So even in a noisy football stadium, you can hear the person speaking. So highly recommend the Audio Technica broadcast stereo headset. It's really good as well if you're interviewing guests to pop one of these on them, because it keeps the microphone at a fixed distance from your mouth. And that's really important. As you practice your podcasting, you'll become much better with your microphone technique. But guests, if they're just doing it one off or not very often, they will be all over the place. They'll be looking left and right and up and down. They'll be moving backwards and forwards from the microphone, and it will sound terrible. But put a headset on your guest, and it keeps the microphone at a fixed distance. You can then fiddle with the gain on the interface to make it the right level, and you're sorted. These are not cheap. They're £179 each on Amazon at the moment, but they do record really high quality sound. And of course, once you've got one or two of these, you can use them for other purposes. So you can use them for making Skype calls with your clients. You can use them for hosting webinars like this one. You could use them for doing voiceovers on videos if you do those as well. So you get really good use out of them. They are robust as well. They last really well. So that kit then, the Focusrite interface, the Audio Technica headset, that's your desk setup. That's what you're going to use to record your podcast when you're sitting at your desk. If you're narrating your introductions, you're doing a solo cast episode where it's just you talking. But you can also use them for Skype calls and for interviewing guests remotely. You can use them, as I said, for hosting webinars. You can use them for anything you want in that respect. Um, But what about if you want to get out of the office and you want to get into the field? What do you need then? You need a field recorder. So you need a device that you can take out and about easily. You could take the Focusrite interface and these headsets out, and I do sometimes, with a laptop and record them that way. But you probably want something more portable. And for me, the best option here is called the Zoom H6. It's a sort of handheld, much bigger than a phone, but yeah, handheld device, and it has got 4 microphone inputs. It's got a microphone capsule on the top of it you can use as well. So you can capture sound straight into the microphone on the top, but better quality sound you're going to get by plugging cables, XLR microphone cables in, and using some microphones, separate microphones. Current price one of those £259 on Amazon. Again, not cheap, but this is broadcast quality equipment. When Paul Lewis from BBC Radio 4's Money Box saw the one I was using at the pension debate last summer, he got very excited by it, and I told him how much it was, and he couldn't believe it because the kit they spend money on at the BBC is much more expensive than that, and this is of similar if not better sound quality than that kit. So get yourself a Zoom H6. And then plug microphones into it. The best ones I found for this are the Behringer Ultra Voice dynamic microphones. You get a pack of 3 on Amazon for 38 quid. And again, I'll put links in that blog post. And that's really all the kit you need. You can invest lots of money in microphone arms and big broadcast microphones and that sort of thing. You don't need it. You get broadcast quality sound from this sort of setup. So go with the simple kit. Go with the most effective option you can. If you're carrying out interviews remotely with people, Skype works perfectly well for this. I've been using Skype quite a bit recently for this. I've got a call recording bit of software that sits alongside Skype and records the call. I've been using Zoom quite a lot to record remote interviews recently, and Zoom has got a built-in call recorder. And in my experience, people are quite familiar with Zoom and not scared by it. Skype, you obviously have to have a Skype account. Zoom, you just go to a website and it does everything for you. There is a piece of software called Zencaster, which I used for a number of years. And the way Zencaster works, a bit like Skype, but it records each side of the call in the local browser, and then at the end uploads them both to the cloud. And Zencaster is good, but it does put people off sometimes. It requires a bit more sort of technical know-how, and the connection quality in the last few episodes. Actually, we lost a few episodes, a few interviews before Christmas, so I have moved mostly to Zoom now. So Zoom, free bit of software, records the call for you, gives you the audio track at the end, and you can make some eye contact with your guest because you can see them on video, which is really helpful. And then last but not least, you're going to need some software to edit your podcast episodes. And there's a free option here, and it's called Audacity. Very, very simple to use, free to download, free to use. The one that I've started using in the past year or so is called Hindenburg Journalist. And Hindenburg is what broadcast journalists use, radio journalists use to put their packages together. It's got some really nice tools in there. It's only a few £100 to buy that bit of software. But the tools in there, it's got a voice enhancer to make you sound like a proper radio broadcaster. It's got some noise removal tools, so if you're recording in a noisy background or you get some hiss from a microphone or something, you can take that out. And when you export the file at the end to your final MP3 file, it does this mastering, so it gets the noise level, the sound level at the right level. So minus 16 LUFS is the technical term for that. And that really makes your podcast episode the right level of loudness for your listener. So your listener's not having to constantly turn their smartphone up and down between episodes. I'm going to put a blog up, as I said earlier, at bamfordmedia.co.uk as soon as I'm finished, with links to all of that kit. And if you ever want to chat about podcasting kit, let me know, because I love to geek out over this stuff. It does give me a great deal of satisfaction to talk about podcasting gear. Okay, so that's the kit you need. That really is that simple. The next big decision you really have to make is around the format of your podcast. What's your podcast going to be like? And I think really there are 3 main different formats you can decide between. So you've got interviews. Interviews is that's what it says it is, where you find someone to talk to and you ask them questions, and you let them talk, and you record an interview. Discussions, where you speak to one or more people around a topic, and that's that sort of round table format. So if you've got other people within your practice who have opinions on a subject, get them around the table with their microphones and have a chat about it. And then the solo cast format, which is just you talking, and you pick a topic and you talk. You don't have to just have one of those. You can mix it up. So An episode could be you talking for a segment, it could be an interview, it could be a discussion, or one episode could be a solo cast, one could be an interview, one could be a discussion. The way I do it for Informed Choice Radio is on a Monday we publish an interview, and on a Friday we publish a solo cast or a discussion. So we mix it up a little bit, find out what works for you and what you're comfortable with. And also look for different formats. So something I tried for the first time last year was a radio call-in format, where I invited listeners to phone in, have a chat with me, ask questions, etc. So I'm going to do more of that this year. But use your imagination, try different things, innovate. It's really good. Um, I said there on the slide, structure and consistency, and I think that's really important. Structure within a podcast is important. The listeners come to expect some form of structure. So, for Informed Choice Radio, for example, we have the same structure in every solo cast episode every Friday. There's an introduction, there is a personal finance news update, there is the main topic, there's sort of housekeeping close type stuff, which is reviews, calls to action. There's the outro, and then we have an after show segment. And I think there's something comforting about listening to a podcast and getting to know the structure over time. So you know broadly what's going to come next. If you don't like a bit of it, you can skip forward to the next segment. It helps you with your planning too. So having a structure to work to makes it much easier to write the content, prepare the content. And then consistency. This is really about your publication schedule. So once you make that decision to become a podcaster, pick a date to publish on and a time to publish each week, and stick to it. Do everything in your power to stick to it, because your listeners will appreciate consistency. And also the podcast players like Apple Podcasts tend to promote podcasts higher up the rankings if they're consistently published. So for me, every Monday and Friday, as I said, on Informed Choice Radio, we publish an episode every Monday and Friday morning. And now every Wednesday morning for the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook from Bamford Media, we publish an episode. I think your listeners will become disappointed if you're due to publish an episode and you don't for any reason. So try your best. It's not the end of the world if you miss it once, but if you start missing them on a regular basis, I think you'll lose subscribers. If you get really stuck and you can't publish a full episode, just pop a 3-minute one out there to say what's happened and that you'll be back at the same time next week. Um, so that's really the decisions you need to make around format. Something I didn't put on that slide, which I think is also important to talk about, is the name of your podcast. And you have to make a decision about this. It's about branding. I think there is still a lot of misunderstanding out there, and maybe even a bit of fear around the word podcast. So I made a conscious choice with the Informed Choice podcast to call it Informed Choice Radio, because a podcast is just a radio show. It's just the way it's delivered is slightly different. I've seen other podcasts successfully use the term FM, and of course you don't need to make any reference to podcast or radio or FM or anything like that. But make a brand decision. You need to think carefully about whether your podcast is going to be named after your financial planning business, or whether you're going to go for a standalone brand. So there is an important branding decision to make here. It was interesting that when the BBC, as I mentioned earlier, launched and really went all in with podcasting before Christmas, they've called their app BBC Sounds. So even the BBC are steering away slightly from that word podcast. It is podcast on BBC Sounds, but it's sort of telling people all this is an audio experience. So think carefully about your name. Right, next slide. Production and distribution. As I said, podcasting is about audio, it's about sound, but there is a visual element to this here too. So you're going to need some artwork, and that's a square artwork image that you see in the podcast player, because it gets shown as a tiny thumbnail image when you look on podcast players on your iPhone or whatever. Make sure it's not too cluttered. Make sure it's easily recognizable from a distance. So stick to your key colors, make it very clear. A really good place to get your podcast artwork designed is People Per Hour, and I've got a fantastic lady on there that I outsource my design work to. So if you'd like to know her details, get in touch. I'm happy to share those. She's consistently very good, also very good value for money. And you need to think about the audio branding of your podcast too. There's nothing wrong with just having your podcast episode as your voice or your voice plus your guests, but I think you can do something a bit better. You can invest in a bit of audio branding. And the resource I recommend for this is a firm based on the Isle of Wight, a fantastic business run by Mike Russell. It's called Music Radio Creative, and they produce the Informed Choice Radio jingles. I'll put a link to them in the blog post too. They've got a fantastic service for podcasters, and all you do is you select the voiceover artist that you want to use, you type in your script, and you send it to them, and then within about 24 hours they come back with a fully produced podcast jingle for you, and you can add that to the start of every single podcast episode. And it just, again, it's about branding. It's about consistency. It gives people a sense of, what you stand for and who you are. In terms of hosting your podcast, then the resource I recommend for hosting is Libsyn, Liberated Syndication, and they, I think, have got the best mix out there of reliability and affordability. So they're not expensive. The package you're going to need on there is about $20 a month, and that gives you plenty of space to host your episodes each month. It gives you access to really good statistics as well, like an analytics platform, and they distribute your podcast episodes to all of the podcast players. So every time you upload an episode to Libsyn, they update the feed, and the feed is what then feeds into Apple Podcasts and Google Play and all the different ones, Stitcher, Overcast, etc. So you do that work once up front. You set up your hosting account with Libsyn, you set up all your feeds to Apple Podcasts and all the others, and then every time you upload an episode, it's automatic. Libsyn will even send a podcast episode to your YouTube channel and upload the audio as a video file, so you don't even have to do that. So Libsyn is my recommendation. There's plenty of other podcast hosts out there, but it's one I've been using since day one. I've never had any issue over downtime, over corrupted files, over missing links or anything like that. They've always been very good, and their support is very good as well. As I said there, RSS feed, that stands for really simple syndication. So your RSS feed is what feeds the podcast players the content. So every time you release an episode, it goes into the podcast player, and your subscribers who are subscribed to your podcast get it automatically onto their phone. So that's what makes podcasting such a powerful way of sharing your message. Once someone's subscribed once, they will get every new episode you publish directly to their phone, so they can listen to it as they go for their dog walk, they work out of the gym, they go for a drive, they get on the train, etc. You need to decide also how to display your podcast episodes on the internet. And Libsyn offers a web page that you can customize a little bit and you can show. So that's the starting point. If you've already got a website and you've got the ability to update blog posts, then you can create a new blog post for each podcast episode. And if you have a WordPress website, the plugin that I recommend is called Smart Podcast Player. And again, I'll put a link in the blog post. It's a way of presenting your podcast episode in a player in a much neater way. Libsyn have a player too, and it's perfectly good. I use the Libsyn player for the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook, but the Smart Podcast Player is fantastic. It's got some extra features. It's got some social media sharing features, and also the opportunity to capture email subscriptions on that one. So that's really good. Um, your blog post for each episode is really important because it's how you reach a wider audience with search engine optimization. You can stuff it full of keywords. You can put links in the blog post for useful resources. So if you talk about a book or a guest, you can put a link to their website, their book, their Twitter account. If you talk about any other useful resources, put it in the blog post. So it gives people a reason who are listening to your podcast episode to go and visit your website and read your blog post. You need to make a decision quite early on about whether to host your podcast show notes on your website, your main website, your financial planner website, or whether to create a second website, a standalone website for your podcast. And I waited too long to pull the trigger on that for Informed Choice Radio. I think we had over 100 episodes in the bank by the time I realized it needed its own website, which meant quite a lot of work in terms of migrating content from one to the other. Maybe don't do it on day one, but certainly within 10 to 20 episodes being published, I think you need to make a decision. Is your podcast, going to be on your main financial planner website? Nothing wrong with that, by the way. You can have a category on their podcasts. Or are you going to have a standalone website that's going to be dedicated to the podcast? But make that decision when you need to. So that's the production and distribution side of things. Promotion. You have to promote each episode, and you have to have a plan for promoting each episode of your podcast. So each time it gets published, run through a checklist of all the things you're going to do to make sure people will actually listen to it. And if you've interviewed a guest for an episode, then make sure you ask them, as well as saying thank you again. Make sure you ask them for their help in sharing the podcast episode with their audience. So this morning I woke up to an email from Advice Front to all of their subscribers, hundreds, thousands of subscribers, and in there included a link to the Informed Choice Radio podcast because recently, just before Christmas, I interviewed their founder, Jose Supico, and they were very pleased to share it with their audience. So it's a way, each time you interview someone, it's a great way of increasing your reach, increasing your distribution if you ask them to share. Not everyone will. Not all of my interview guests share with their audience because some are just doing multiple podcasts every week, and for some they just don't want to promote someone else's stuff, which is fair enough. They've done me a good favor by being a guest anyway. So make sure you've got a plan. Social media is really important, of course, when it comes to promoting your podcast. So make sure you're sharing it across the full range of Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, anywhere else that your clients hang out. There's a really useful tool here, which is called Headliner. And again, I'll put a link in the blog post for this webinar. Headliner is used to create what's called an audiogram for each episode. So you take a snippet of audio content from the episode or from the interview, you drop it into Headliner with a bit of graphic, and it animates a moving wave file, a sound file against that graphic. Looks really neat. It's really good for engagement, and you can then share that on social media as a bit of a teaser for that episode. Um, and it's a free tool as well, I should mention. So it's even better because it's free. Um, your email list is really important. So for every single episode you publish, make sure you email it to your list. And we've got a specific email list for the Informed Choice Radio podcast. People subscribe to that list, so they're kept up to date with new episodes as they come out. So email it as well, and hopefully your guests will email it to their list. And then finally on there, and I mentioned this a bit earlier, repurpose content. So every single podcast episode you produce, every single guest interview you carry out is an opportunity to turn that content into something else, a different format. So you could write a blog post about it. You could write an article about the topics in that interview and maybe publish it on LinkedIn or Medium. You could make a video, short YouTube video with some of the key tips, key findings, key learnings from that podcast episode. Um, After you've published, say, 30 or 40 episodes, you could pull together the best bits and put them into a book or a guide. And I mentioned earlier, that's what I'm currently working on for Informed Choice Radio. 200 plus guest interviews, choosing the best bits, trying to find some common themes, and writing a whole book about it. It's going to be a 50,000 word book. But it's a great opportunity. Don't consider podcast production to be a one and done. I think it's a really wasted opportunity if all you're doing is recording an episode and then putting it out there and that's it. Yeah, turn it into something else, put a slightly different spin on it, reach a different audience. Right, now before I finish up, and I'll obviously open the floor to any questions people have as well, just a few more tips and things I've learned from sort of 4 years and 500 episodes of podcasting. Firstly, relax. Remember to breathe as you're recording. I find personally it helps if before I start recording, I go for a bit of a walk, and then when I come back to the office, sit down, close my eyes for 60 seconds, just relax, and then get into it. If you catch yourself rushing through the script, rushing through the episode, just pause, slow down, remember to take a breath, and yeah, just try and find a more natural, comfortable pace to record at. Don't aim for perfection. Your podcast recordings do not need to be perfect. In fact, they should not be perfect. I've got one podcasting client who will remain unnamed because I don't want to embarrass him. But he, before he came and engaged with us, spent an entire day trying to record his first podcast episode, take after take after take, to record a 6-minute podcast episode. And actually, what he recorded after all those takes, the best take, he still wasn't happy with. Um, so he actually wound up as a result of that experience quite scared of the microphone. Every time he picks up the microphone, start recording, viewed it as a springboard to failure really. So about a week later, after he engaged with us, he came into my studio for half a day, and we recorded 12 10 to 15 minute episodes, which he was really happy with. So don't try and make it perfect. I think sometimes people in the search for perfection just don't get things done. So done is better than perfect. And actually, I think listeners of podcasts quite like the natural, authentic approach to recording. So if you stumble over your words, if you mispronounce something, which I do all the time, if you lose your train of thought or your place in the notes, laugh it off and keep going. Podcast listeners do quite like that. So don't aim for perfection. Be as natural as you can. It's really important to plan ahead with your podcast content. Really, really important. I mentioned earlier in the webinar the importance of consistency once you start publishing. So if you commit to a publication schedule every Monday, every Friday, every Tuesday, whatever it might be, make sure you've got the content and you've planned ahead. You should never run out of content. One of the earlier webinars we did was how to find content inspiration. There's so much out there in the personal finance space in terms of things to talk about. So have some backup content ready just in case an interview guest goes wrong, goes AWOL, or you come down with flu or something and you can't record. So have something in the can ready to go. And then finally, in terms of an extra tip, consider a seasons format. And what I mean by that is you group a series of episodes, 5, 10, 15 episodes under one season because they've got a similar topic. And a really good example of this going well is Pete Matthew, Meaningful Money. I mentioned him already. He this week has just started on season 13 of Meaningful Money, and it's all about millennial money. So he's found a topic, millennial money. He's grouping it under a season of episodes. I think he does about 12 in his seasons. But seasons tend to work really well, really popular with listeners, and it's really well supported as well by Apple Podcasts because you can number the season, and then Apple Podcasts will present the season in that group. Okay, before I ask if there are any questions, just a couple of things coming up I wanted to make you aware of. So 11 a.m. on Thursday, the 7th of February, is our next free webinar. And that one's all about writing, publishing, and promoting your financial planner book. I know becoming a published author is a goal for lots of financial planners I speak to. It's a really, it's probably the most powerful way to establish your credibility and to raise your profile with your target audience. So if you want to become a published author, do check in for that webinar, register for that webinar now, 11 a.m. Thursday, the 7th of Feb, and you can do that at bamfordmedia.co.uk/webinar. I'll be sharing my experience as a traditionally published author. So I have 3 books published with Pearson Prentice Hall, but also as a self-published author, and also why I think that self-publishing is now a superior route to trying to win a book deal with a traditional publisher. So all will be revealed on that webinar. And then also Friday, the 21st of June 2019, this is the big one, Financial Planner Marketing Summit, which takes place at the Electric Theatre in Guildford. fpmsummit.uk for all the information about that one. This is the first one-day conference from Bamford Media. I'm really excited about it. I've got 11 speakers lined up who are not your run-of-the-mill financial services conference speakers. So these are names and people you're not seeing on the circuit. Some really new, fresh ideas about how to reach and how to communicate with your target audience, how to better communicate and secure loyalty and secure referrals from your existing clients, and really how to understand the art and science of marketing for financial planners. So more information about the speakers and the format of the day and tickets and things at fpmsummit.uk. Do check that out. I'd love to see you at that one. It's a bit scary putting on your first one-day conference, and I've got a break-even point which we're heading towards in terms of ticket sales, but we're confident on that one. Have lots and lots of interest in that one. So fpmsummit.uk. If you have a question, now is the time to ask it. So you can ask your question below by actually in the chat bar on the right hand side or below in the question section. So I'll waffle for another minute or so to give people an opportunity to ask any questions. Do get in touch if you'd like a copy of the slides, if you would like the full transcript from this webinar, if you would like a CPD certificate. I'm very happy to produce one of those for you. So my contact details are there. hello@bamfordmedia.co.uk. You can call 01483 901 472 or visit our website, bamfordmedia.co.uk. On our website, we share ideas and insights and also examples of the work we do for our clients. So that's podcasting, creating content, building websites, all sorts of things, publishing magazines, anything around content marketing for financial planners, wealth managers, product providers. We're very happy to help you with. I'm not seeing any questions coming through. So with that, oh no, here we go. Charlie Goodman, thank you for your question. Charlie asks, how much time on average does it take to produce an Informed Choice Radio episode? So the Informed Choice Radio episodes tend to run to between about 20 and 40 minutes in length. The production time, I think I've got it down to a fairly fine art now. It depends a lot on whether it's an interview episode on a Monday or whether it's a solo cast. The solo casts take me a lot longer to produce because I script them out entirely. So 20 minutes of talking obviously takes quite a bit of scripting than the interviews. The interviews are great because you work out what questions you're going to ask, and I typically come up with 10 to 12 questions, and you let the guest do all the talking. So the guest is doing the hard work for you around the preparation. I would say probably an hour and a half to 2 hours end to end for an episode. So planning the content, recording the content, which takes, as I say, 20 to 30 minutes, editing, putting the music in the right places, making it sound really good, uploading it to the podcast host, and then scheduling the social media post, writing the show notes, that sort of thing. I do get a bit of help with that. So I have a team here who do some of that heavy lifting, particularly around the social media scheduling. But the recording, the planning, recording, and editing, I do myself. The preparing questions for guests, I have an assistant that does that, does the research and prepares the questions, and then I just check I'm happy with them before they go off. But the interviews themselves, I carry out. The editing, I do myself. I think if you, for a 20-minute episode, you allow yourself a couple of hours when you get started. I think that's probably enough. That's going to get you a good quality recording without overthinking it. As I said earlier, don't aim for perfection here. Don't invest a day or two in trying to come up with a 20-minute episode. You will get faster with more experience. So the more practice you have, particularly with editing. So the editing software I use now, I've done it so many times. I can see from looking at the visual sound waves on the editor when someone has said or a bit I might need to go in and check and see if there was an error made because there's a gap of sound or a bit of crosstalk or something. So practice makes perfect, but don't aim for complete perfection. Charlie, I hope that's okay. Um, Thank you. That's it. That's it from me. I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to say Happy New Year. I look forward to welcoming you for future webinars. All of our webinars that we've got planned for the first half of 2019 are now listed at bamfordmedia.co.uk/webinar. So do check those out. Register for any you're interested in. And I look forward to speaking to you very soon. Thanks for your time.